I don't know if any of you guys who've been watching my content have guessed this yet about me or my family and the stories that I've told and my opinions about men and women and all of those things, but tonight's when I'm going to share it with you. I hope it's not TMI, but so far we've been okay with all the stuff I've been sharing about my stories growing up, and it seems to shed some light on how my weird brain got here to think the things I think and see the struggles that men have these days, and why I'm it's either be a passport bro or a MGTOW monk, which is not a common thing to think, especially for a woman. But anyway, hi, welcome back to Far From Eden. Please hit like if you haven't so far on this video and subscribe to the channel. It helps the logarithm logarithm. Oh my gosh, I had a mathematics flashback. That's not good. Anyway, algorithm. There's going to be people in the chat that talk about math now. That's okay. That's okay. I always learn from you guys. So I'm a little nervous to talk about this. And I just want to preface this, as we all have to when we're on YouTube or saying anything in public, is that I am not a doctor. And I am not an expert on this the way a doctor would be. So none of this is medical advice. And I don't need people to argue with me about this. I'm not trying to approach it from a scientific point of view. However, have you guys ever noticed how many women out there seem to exhibit characteristics of borderline personality disorder? I remember the first time that I ever heard of borderline personality disorder. I could take you to the lecture hall where I was and approximate where I was sitting. It was just like one of those moments where you're freeze frame the memory, because it was Psych 101, right? I'm a college dropout, so woohoo! I'm actually proud of that. I kind of want a sweatshirt that says college dropout. Anyway, beside the point. I was in Psych 101, I think my first semester of college, and I really enjoyed psychology. I still enjoy thinking about the way people think and how they become who they become and why we do what we do. I think that's fascinating. I think psychology has gone down a bit of a scary route, and especially with all of the medicines and stuff prescribed, I think it's gone down a route that maybe it shouldn't. But however, having said that, that's why I said I am not a psychiatrist, I'm not a doctor. I don't really even agree with what the doctors do or say. I'm a rebel that way with the doctors. Anyway, so I'm in the lecture hall and it's Psych 101, and we're talking about just kind of the basic, most common mental illnesses and personality disorders. And I remember I was taking notes. Over here on my left, I had bipolar and its symptoms. And then over here, I had borderline personality disorder and its symptoms. And I was because when I was writing down the bipolar stuff, I was oh my gosh, that's my mom. And then I remembered one of the things she had said, just sort of, not in passing, but when she's having kind of a mini blow up or even just, I don't know, it's difficult to explain sort of the conversations we would have and where they would go. But she had said before, when I was a child, that at one point in time, when it was around the time that after I was born, I can't remember if my brothers had been born yet or not, probably. That's another video about my brothers. And I will remember to do that one. That's literally the next one that I'm going to make. So at some point, a doctor diagnosed her with manic depression. So that's an old-timey term for bipolar, basically. I mean, they used to kind of call it that. And in my mind, when she would say a doctor once diagnosed me with manic depression, she would say that in a sort of like dismissive way, like, can you believe that? Or was it, I've got issues, so like leave me alone? I'm not sure what the point was to say that to people, me. I don't know who else she was saying it to, but she was saying it to me. So I knew that. So anyway, so I thought about that when I was taking these notes, and I was thinking about manic depression, and I was like, well, I know that that's basically bipolar. So I'm like, wait a second. Yeah, I know. It's like churning slowly in my brain. Like, it happened faster than what I'm saying it, but like when you're realizing something, when something's clicking and it's about one of your parents, you're kind of like, hold on a second, you know? So I was like, well, yeah, that doctor was right. So I'm there diagnosing, you know, and you're in Psych 101. I mean, the teacher did say, hey, by the end of this, you're going to think you have all these diseases. And I was like, yeah, I could see that. You kind of convince yourself. So I was kind of checking myself, make sure I wasn't just making it up in my head. But remembering that some doctor had diagnosed her with manic depression, I was like, oh crap, well, she has bipolar, right? And I'm like sure of it. And we continue. And then we move to personality disorders, and we start writing down the symptoms of borderline personality disorder. And I was like, have you seen Uncle Buck? Do you remember the part where he's looking at the guy who's with the teenager girl and he's trying to intimidate the guy? The guy's name is Bug. This is John Candy. And he goes, he's got an axe, and he's like, the axe can like do something with a gnat, something like that. And the guy's name is Bug. Says, Bug, gnat, is there a little similarity there? That was a long thing to just say in my head. Borderline and bipolar, is there a little similarity there? And so the teacher went on to describe, like, well, here's the difference basically. And I mean, any of you psych people are going to get mad and say this is incorrect. Basically, bipolar is like, this is a disorder that's a chemical imbalance that can be treated with medicine, and it's that kind of a thing. And with bipolar, it's like you have weeks of mania, weeks of depression, or at least days, maybe months, right? So, but with borderline personality disorder, it can be like, woo, like it can be just all of a sudden. Have you seen the movie Chasing Amy? She has a scene when she's like kind of half in the car and half out of the car, and her face just changes. She goes from like to like it looks like possession. Anyway, that's a really good example of what it sort of is like. But those people are volatile. And borderline personality disorder, the way they describe it, is not something that can be treated with medicine or therapy a lot of times. Sometimes I know, but most times no, because the person is unable to reflect. So there's a lot of them loose out there with no treatment and no awareness and no accountability. So I was like sitting there and I'm looking at these two things and I'm like, oh, so basically, and I had figured, oh, she's not bipolar. She has borderline personality disorder. And I'm sitting there in this room, and that's why I remember it exactly. Because I was like time just stopped. Because I like figured my mom out in that moment. It wasn't a happy moment. It wasn't like, oh, good. It was like, oh, crap. because I was like, in my head at that moment, I was like, oh, the difference between borderline personality disorder and bipolar is with borderline, you're just an asshole. Like, you know, and so I understood her better. I understood that. It made a lot of sense. And I know that if anybody's watching this, and there's not that many women that watch this, thank God, because I'm not speaking to them really. There's no point. I'm not trying to convince feminists. That's a ridiculous thing. Even having those two words next to each other, convince feminists. I mean, why don't I just go beat my head against this wall? That's a silly thing to try to do. It does not work. So there's just, they're lost. That's why I say passport bro or MGTOW monk. That's a good idea, because it's not worth the risk. But anyways, so I figured that out about my mom, and I knew about some of the trauma that she had had as a child. And as I've learned more about BPD, I have understood and confirmed that this is definitely what she struggled with. When she was medicated after having breast cancer, she survived from that. But after that, she was medicated with something to help the hot flashes, because you take a medicine that reduces your estrogen, and then that creates hot flashes. So then they give you another medicine, and I'm trying to think if it was an antidepressant or if it was a nerve medicine. I think, you know what? It was the antidepressant. I think it was. And at the time, I really didn't know very much about these medicines, but it did help her. It didn't change how she functioned, but it slowed it down, if that makes sense. A lot of times people with borderline personality disorder, they're extremely reactive. And if they just can have a second before they explode, it helps. So what I have seen in my personal experience is that will sort of help if they want to be better. Obviously, if they don't want to be better and they don't care, it's not gonna matter. And my mom, honestly, oh my gosh. You guys, I run these shows like it's live, so I just know what I'm going to talk about. I know the information in my head. I'm not going to have a piece of paper, because I want it to be very natural talking with you. So I realize things as I talk to you. And what I just realized is that I never talked to her about this. I never told her, hey, you have borderline personality disorder. I've only talked about it with a few people, and now all of you. But I think it's important, because I know that this is definitely going to be in our discussions going forward. And it's been in our discussions previously, but I haven't said it outright. I don't think I have. I don't know. I've been doing this for 3 years. I don't think that I have. I haven't known quite how to. And I think I don't know. Maybe I wasn't ready. But now I just think that the more videos that I do, and the more candid I am, the deeper we dig with this, and the more honest we are. The fact that my mom had borderline personality disorder is relevant. And here's the part where you're like, well, I didn't think that was the big secret. It's not. So about 2019, I think it was, I was reflecting on some things about myself and my decisions. I had made one of the worst decisions of my life in 2018. And so, ramifications, consequences, and reflections on that. In 2019, I realized, oh my God, I have borderline personality disorder. And it was overwhelming. I felt ashamed. I also felt better, because I thought, well, if I know what this is and I can I can see this in hindsight, then going forward, I should be better. So the decision, and I'm giving this for context so you can understand how mine played out. I think it's important you know the source that you're talking to when we talk about all this stuff, because how did I get here is very important, I think. And it's odd. It's a very strange, weird combination of circumstances. And having this, being close with borderline personality disorder with my mom, and I mean, you guys have, if you've seen some of the stories in the other videos about her, check out the Mimi's Cafe one that I just did. I don't know. I think it's rampant. I think you want to talk about an epidemic. I think with women, I think borderline personality disorder is an absolute epidemic. I just watched Russell Brand last night. I watched his podcast, and he had Dr. Drew on. And I want to show you guys this video, and I hope I have the energy to do it tomorrow. I want to show you guys this video because Dr. Drew was talking about how in this generation, Gen Z, for example, specifically, there's so much cluster B disorders, like, I don't know the term to use, but just rampant. The narcissistic disorders, and borderline is one of them. And he even said specifically with women, there's so much of it. And if you research it, it'll say like 0.1% of the population is borderline. Baloney. 0.1%. Dude, I mean, sometimes when you're a hammer, everything's a nail. But I mean, they're everywhere. Amber Heard was one. I mean, and Dr. Drew even said, like, actors, you got to be a narcissist to do that. And with the females, it's going to be borderline. I mean, they're going to be, they're going to be explosive, temperamental. So I realized that I had it. And the reason I realized it is because I did make that really bad decision. And I want to tell you guys about it because it's not about a guy. It's not about sex. It's not about anything like that. I was living in an area, and I was doing a job that I could do. And I was working for a friend, and she knew all about my MS. I had known her since I was a kid. We had been friends since I was a kid. We'd lived apart most of the time because I've moved all over, but we'd always stayed in contact, and we were both in horses. So I was able to give some riding lessons for her, and the facility was great. It was in a place in the country where the weather is great. She was very understanding. I could use a golf cart. I could live on the property. I mean, as I'm saying it, I'm like, oh my gosh, dumb. And then, I mean, I love her. Working for her is very demanding. Now, since somebody did see a video long ago of mine and then freaked out and said I called her husband something, I'm like, no, I didn't call her husband something. I said that the MGTOW guys would, but I'm not. So that's a video far back. I think it's How I Got Burned. It's like 2 years ago, three years ago, 2021, early 2021, if you guys want to find it, How I Got Burned. Anyway, so I get paranoid that someone's going to see it. But she's a good lady, but she's demanding to work for. And I had more issues than I knew. So I was asked to show up early before I had to work as a favor to check and make sure that the guy that was supposed to be doing like stall cleaning and turning horses out was actually doing his job, because she was away at a horse show. I got there. He was not. He was hanging out with the other worker that worked for the property owner. And I'm like, oh, this is awkward. So pause on that So this worker is not from this country. That's not part of this discussion, but he's not from this country. And because I've been in the horse business, I've had some experience with people not from this country, from south of the border. And so, unbeknownst to me, my brain is remembering that. My brain is remembering being engaged to somebody whose, grandparents or whatever were from south of the border. And he was the trainer and I was the riding instructor. And that was when I was 19, engaged to him. That was my last relationship. So that lasted 3 years and that ended in 2000. So it's been 23 years that I, have been in a physical relationship with a man. That's also for context with all of these videos that I've made. I feel like it's different when I can comment on the 304s and say, hey, you can keep your legs shut. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. Anyway, so that fiance, that ex-fiance from, gosh, at that point in time, it would have been 18 years ago before this happened, because this was 2018. And I had troubles with him. I did not choose well. And my father was busy dealing with my mother. So they weren't thinking about what their eldest daughter was doing. They weren't, I don't want to blame them, but they definitely did not stop things. He was 10 years older than me, which would have been fine. If he was an upstanding individual, who was established as far as, taking care of himself and being responsible and all the rest of it. But that's not who that guy was. And he was not nice to the horses. In fact, one of my horses died because of his training techniques. So there was a lot of trauma from that relationship that was unresolved, and I did not know. And like I said, I picked him. I picked that guy, right? And so flash forward to 2018, here's this guy and he's working, he's not taking care of the horses. And some of these horses need to get out, they need to walk. It's too hot where we were. He wasn't taking care of them. And it wasn't a life and death situation, but my brain thought it was. And so I had a bit of a conflict with him. He got a little bit loud and argumentative. Nothing to freak out about. But my brain freaked out about it and felt afraid. I felt literally afraid. And he was stepping towards me, looking back, I'm like, he's not going to do anything. But at the time, it was like a panic to me. And so I called the police. The reason I called the police is I wanted to make a record of his aggression towards me and that I felt threatened, because we lived on the same property, and there were times when I was alone in where I was living and he was living where he, like, in his dwelling on the property, and I was like, if he's angry, like, I just felt afraid. But I realized that was compounded because of the stuff in my head from 18 years ago and how traumatized I was from that. I keep using that word. I hate using words that all these chicks use to describe, like, I was abused and all that crap. So painting themselves as the victim as if they had nothing to do with the choice of the guy or what have you, and making it into this like big old thing that it wasn't, right? So it seemed like a bigger deal to me. And I told my friend, and I didn't tell her about the police. I just made the report and I did it off the property because I didn't want it to be, I didn't want to hurt her business. But I thought, in case I need to call them again, I want them to know why they're coming, which I know now was an overreaction. And so then I told my friend, and she seemed to take it seriously. She seemed to say, she said, I'm going to talk to him, and, you know, she was going to let him go. Well, also because he was working with a horse, and he got the horse upset because he was being impatient. He was being impatient with the horse, and the horse flipped over backwards and fell. This happens sometimes, rarely, when you're training. And I know saying that's like, what? I know it shouldn't. It doesn't happen with the tactics I use. That's the way my ex-fiance killed my horse, is my horse flipped over, but it was in his stall, so he hit his head and instantly broke his neck. So the last thing I heard as I was walking down the barn aisle was crash. I walked back and he was laying dead in the stall. He'd had that horse since he was a baby. Anyway, so then when I saw this horse flip over, you know, I didn't understand also why my friend was not taking this seriously. And she said, well, it's really hard to replace him before this big national horse show that's coming up. And I was like, I get it. But after this, I'll let him go. I was like, okay. So it's the Saturday when she was like, she's going to let him go. So I'm like, oh, thank God he's not going to be at the barn. So I'm walking up into the barn from where I was sitting teaching lessons. I hadn't been in the barn yet. I was just going to use the restroom. And I'm walking up the little hill to get into the barn, and there he is. And you would have thought that he had attacked me previously. I mean, my brain is like overreacting just to walk past him. And I felt so betrayed by my friend. Like, I felt like, oh my God. And I shouldn't have, this was such an overreaction in my brain. But in the moment, I really was like ultra panicked and felt like no one would listen to me. Like, she wasn't taking it seriously. Like, he was dangerous. Like, he was going to hurt the horses. One of the horses was going to die. I started thinking about a horse that had passed away a few months ago. I'm like, maybe that's because he didn't do what he was supposed to do. Like, my brain was spinning. Also, earlier in 2018, I had started to realize, oh, there's some trauma. My mom had died like 2.5 years previous to that, 3 years maybe. And there was some stuff starting to come out. I was like, maybe it's time to do some grief counseling. So I got a counselor, and it was going well. And we were going to do some, oh gosh, I can't remember what it's called, but it's when they like flash a light or whatever, and you're supposed to have all your traumatic experiences and then sort of reclassify them. EMDR therapy. I look back and I'm like, I think that guy knew I was borderline, because EMDR can be effective. Cognitive behavioral therapy, maybe. I don't know. I'm skeptical if that would work. But EMDR, I think, might, depending. But so we were planning to do that. So he said, okay, this was our preparation for the EMDR. I said, I want you to imagine something in your mind like a container. And I was like, okay, I got the container. And he's like, okay, this is what we're going to do. Like, all the traumatic occurrences in your life, we're going to put them in there. And then what you're going to learn to do is open it, like think about it, deal with it, put it back in there. I was like, okay, got it. I'm on it. I'm going to do this. He said, I want you to go home between now and our next appointment, a week or 2 weeks later, and write down from your birth, every traumatic experience or difficult experience you've had your whole life. I said, all right, got it. You think you can handle it? Yeah. Went home. Okay. And I was like, all right, we'll start from the beginning. Well, I had just recently been told by someone, a friend who knows a little something about this stuff, that my brother's dying when I was 1 year old and 2 years old, and hearing about it, I remember when I was 2 years old and hearing about that my brothers had passed, was trauma. And when that man told me that, I was like, what? That's trauma? Yeah, that's trauma. I was like, it is. So I started with that horse dying and landing in a stall. I know it's only a horse, but I'm not saying it was like a person dying, but it wasn't the best thing. It was pretty violent. So that was something. The ex-fiance chasing me through our apartment, that was something. Finding out the ex-fiance had inappropriate, very inappropriate relations with one of our writing students, and I had no idea, but found out later when a cop visited me. Another thing. So I was like, oh, my mom, you know, I wasn't like at Mimi's Cafe, I wasn't writing that down. But, you know, I was writing the things down. My parents breaking up. That I didn't even write the times I've moved when my dad switched jobs, and it was like, okay, new school and new friends. Go meet new friends. I don't want new friends. I want my old friends. So I wrote all the things down. And the next appointment, we got a little sidetracked, talked a little bit about what I was dealing with at the barn, and still didn't get to the EMDR. Weeks went by. My friend said, have you gotten started with the EMDR? Not yet, we're preparing. He needs to start with the EMDR. And I was like, he will. And I was justifying what this psychologist was doing, what this therapist was doing. Like, oh, it's not time yet, don't worry, we're making progress. But I didn't realize, like, I had unearthed all these things, right? So they were just brewing. I don't think I put them in the container. They were like, if I did, they were busting out. And I didn't realize. And I was dealing with this, you know, perceived, and that's probably why I perceived it the way I did, because I had resurrected all of these, you know, experiences and thought about, wow, that was difficult and that was difficult. And it almost, in a way, it makes it worse. I'm not saying we shouldn't deal with the things we have, but, you know, you don't want to meditate on them. You don't want to give them more power and make them in charge of your life. I think that happens a lot when women go to therapy and they sit there and talk about all these difficult things that happen to them, and then they make themselves a victim that way, and they start to see as everything like it's coming at them. At least that seems like, in retrospect, how it was, but it amplified everything, I think. So it's taking a long time, but it was a lot, and I came to this stupid decision that I should leave and go to the next state over, where I had another friend I could live with. And the reason I was living with friends is because I had never lived by myself. I had had MS, like really bad MS, since the year 2000. I think I had it before that, but you know, it was really bad and limiting since the year 2000. I was afraid to live by myself, and I didn't know. Silly. I did not know there were all these like government programs, because I wasn't raised to think about government programs. I just wasn't raised in that kind of a culture, like food stamps and that kind of a thing. I just didn't know anything about that stuff. So I was like, well, I can't afford to live on my own, so, you know, living with friends. And so I was, and so I moved in with another friend. I thought it would only be temporary for other reasons that I won't go into now. I didn't think I was going to move back to the original friend's house. I just thought there was something after my new friend that I had moved into with. I hope that makes sense. And then so when I got to the new friend's house, sort of like almost the next year, I was thinking about, God, I left there. I had such a great atmosphere. You know, the weather, even though it got really hot, it was actually good for me. I was doing really well. I was safe. I was with people who loved me. Were they perfect? No. But am I perfect? No. And I didn't just let it go. It wasn't that important. It wasn't worth blowing up my whole life and hurting them and hurting the students I was teaching. And so as I sat there on my bed in the next like location, after, I don't know, a year had gone by-ish, I was reflecting, and I just thought, that's borderline. And I remember the therapist, the week before I left, the week before I made the decision to leave in our appointment, he said, don't do anything. And I said, I'm not going to do anything. I'm not going anywhere. And he's like, don't leave, okay? Don't do anything. Just. And I was like, yeah, I mean, what are you talking about? Yeah, of course I wouldn't go anywhere. Boy, he knew. Like, he knew enough to know that, but not enough to get the EMDR started. Oh, it's my responsibility not to make stupid mistakes. But man, I wish he would have started the EMDR earlier, or not had me write down all my trauma. And I really wish I didn't have borderline personality disorder, but I realized that I did. And I looked back on my life, and I looked back on the times when my dad would say, Erin, oh, that's my name, by the way, you have to think before you speak. And all the time, you know, even when I was 8 years old, 10 years old, 12 years old, 14 years old, I had a mouth on me. And it didn't always have, you know, I didn't always know to hold back. I have strong opinions. That's why when I found out what was going on with men, I was like, we have to talk about this. Why isn't anyone screaming this from the mountaintops? And that's why I started my channel. Like I said, I did not do this to be a YouTuber. I did this because, oh my gosh, like, why isn't everybody talking about this? I mean, anyway, so yeah, I have borderline personality disorder light, I would say. It means that when things are, I get overwhelmed very easily, and I can tend to feel like it's a panic. And I don't, you know, I don't, it's been a long time since I never sounded like a toddler. I never sounded like that. But I didn't have the pause. And I definitely, inside, when things were going on, like the situation I described, it seemed bigger than what it was. And it's basically just from feeling, it comes from a sense of abandonment when you're a child. And I know that my mom definitely had that. She was raised by her grandmother instead of her mother. Her mother was in a wheelchair. And so I always thought, well, I mean, if she couldn't raise you, like, I understand. But then I was like, well, wait a second. She raised her other daughter with her second husband, but she didn't raise my mom and her sister from the first marriage. The grandmother did. And one day I was little, and I was like, wait a second, well, why did she raise her, but she didn't, how come our great grandmother raised you guys? And she's like, oh, my mom didn't want to raise me. What? What did you just say? Your mom decided not to raise you? Ouch. And it never occurred to me because I knew my grandma and there was no animosity. And it was never like, oh, well, you abandoned. Like, it was just like, doo-doo, it's fine. And I was like, this is not normal. Like, you should be upset. Like, that's hurtful. What? And I realized, like, she never dealt with it. But inside, yes. And obviously, her father opted not to also. They got pregnant and married very early. My grandmother was 14 when she had my mom's older sister and got married then. And there's all kinds of stories about how he was and what kind of person my grandmother was. And I mean, it just was a mess. And I don't think either one of them were stellar individuals, but basically, from my mom's perspective, neither one of them wanted her. And really all that matters is that as a child, you just feel like you are not wanted or you are not good enough from your parents. And how I think mine manifested is dealing with a mother that struggled with that, but also, and we haven't gotten to that yet, but because, I mean, my dad was struggling with all of this, you know, craziness, reactiveness, storming out, leaving the house. Is mom coming back? I don't know. You know, it's like, Uh, he worked a lot, and he worked, out of town. He was in an industry that travel was a big part of it. That's why he moved all over the place. And I think he didn't try not to travel. And Dad was always gone. We were always going to the airport to get him. And, at one point he worked and lived in another country. And my mother felt abandoned by that, as you can imagine. She hadn't dealt with the other abandonment from her childhood. So when Dad's away all the time, it's personal and she's abandoned, and she would voice that. So then I felt abandoned, and it felt personal to me too. Anyway, so I think that's where the borderline light comes from. And I will just close after all of that, because I probably could just talk about this forever and keep interjecting stories. But I think that this is important information going forward, and I didn't just want to be like, before another video, by the way, I have borderline personality disorder. Anyway, let's talk about this. So this is my confession. And it's kind of, a confession is sort of like, the connotation is like I did something bad. It's not, but the behavior and everything that goes along with borderline personality, you can control it. You can. You have to realize where it comes from. It's hard. And I really, really regret, especially that decision in 2018. Worst decision I ever made, even worse than choosing that dude. Well, I don't know. Maybe that guy, when I was 19, was the worst situation. He was a horse trainer. I was like, excellent. That's what we're going to do. And I was blind, just blind. That's why I don't think that women should choose the men, because we just can't. We do not make good decisions on that. So I think all of that is good context, and I can refer back to this video because it just seems like a lot. And it also is good context for when we go forward and I tell about my mom and about my dad and how his coping skill was to leave. He didn't abandon the family, he didn't divorce, but he had to get out. And I get it. And I understand, and I forgive him for that. I think he was doing the best he could. I wish it was different in a way, but when we're in that situation, it's just really hard to see clearly. So anyway, thank you guys for listening. I hope you got to, I was long-winded, I understand, but I hope that you got the points and made it to here, maybe played it in 2 times speed, hear me sound like it doesn't sound like a chipmunk, but yeah. So I'm just making sure that I didn't miss anything huge. I don't think so. So I hope you guys have a good rest of your evening, and I appreciate you guys. I read just about all the comments. I try not to miss any, and I try to respond to as many as I can. And I appreciate you guys. I like reading your feedback. And please let me know if there's anything specific you'd like me to talk about or cover, because this channel is for you guys. I get a lot out of it too, as far as, being able to talk about this stuff. But it's for you guys. That's why I started it. So let me know if there's anything that we need to talk about, or that I'm off base with. Something that I need to understand, let me know. And I hope you guys have a good rest of your evening, and I hope that you guys are taking care of yourselves. You deserve it. And remember, you don't have to be done. It doesn't have to be over. There doesn't have to be no purpose. You have purpose. There is meaning. And you can be MGTOW monk, get that cabin you wanted, do van life, go across the country, Australia, Canada, whatever country you're in, do van life, get a camera, start taking photos, get a dog or a cat, or passport bro. Go to another country where feminism hasn't taken hold. Find a little woman, as I just wrote in a comment to somebody, find a little woman who smiles and makes food and appreciates you and is loyal because she values you, and she kind of has to be. That's a situation we women need to be in. We need to be in a situation where we have to make the right decision, kind of like children. So anyway, on that note, I will talk to you guys next time. Be well.